everyone. Welcome to our podcast, This Is My Story, where we talk about the weird reality of rad. If you're one of our loyal listeners, welcome back. If you're new to our channel, welcome here. It's great to have you join us today. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel and you've turned on notifications so you can get our episodes straight to your inbox on Tuesday mornings. You can also check out our other social media. We have a Facebook page and Instagram account, and links for both of those are down below in the description. This podcast is interviews with parents, kids, and professionals who share their stories with us on a wide range of experiences, anything from their craziest happenings to their journey of healing. Today is Tuesday, July 14th. Joining me today is Sharon Neasbitt, and she is a grandma who's raising her grandson who had reactive attachment disorder. He's now healthy and healed. And she is also a therapist, so she works with kids who have reactive attachment disorder and their families, helping them with the healing process from trauma and helping parents and kids find that bond and attachment. So this is the first part of her interview. We have episode 19 today, and she will be back for episode 20 next week. So I'm really excited. She has some great stuff to talk about and tells a really, really funny story about holy water and bedtime. So let's get into it. All right, welcome to our podcast, Sharon. We're really glad to have you here doing this interview. Do you want to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yes. Karen, my name is Sharon Neasbitt. A little bit about me is I have 3 kiddos, 2 birth children, and then I adopted my biological grandson, Blake, who is now 17. Blake and I live in Edmond, Oklahoma.
All right, so what's something that stands out to you about your journey with RAD?
You know, Karen, I had to learn that I was really the one that had to change the most. I couldn't change him. The only person I could change was myself. And you might think I should have known that. I probably should have, but I grew up in a very strict, controlling. She could raise an eyebrow, and none of the rest of us could do that, but she could raise an eyebrow, and I knew exactly what that meant. And I would change my behavior just based on what I knew or thought the punishment from her would be. So with Blake, I had to learn to believe in the possibility of change and have a much more positive attitude. I figured out after failing many times that if I changed my attitude and my actions and stopped reacting to everything and respond to him, that his behavior would change. You know, one of the things that I will never forget in the beginning was he needed transition time. So if I ever said to him, Blake, it's time to take a bath, let's go, he would throw a screamer. And I learned, and he couldn't yet tell time, so I learned to give him, to do transition time. I would say, okay, Blake, in 15 minutes, we're going to go up and take a bath. And he would look at me and nod. And that 15 minutes I could drag out for, 30 minutes, or I could shorten it to 5 because he couldn't tell time. Right. And that only worked until he could tell time. But I found that it worked, and it made parenting for me a whole lot more fun. So I learned that the system, and the system I'm talking about is the family system that Blake was growing up in, which was myself and another family member that lived with me that very much helped co-parent him at times. Mm-hmm. When I changed what I was doing, he changed. And, my goal was not to control, and in the beginning it was, and I failed miserably at that. And my goal was to connect with him. And in order to do that, I had to be nurturing. And sometimes I was just so angry at some of the behaviors that it was difficult to be nurturing. I learned to set appropriate limits and be consistent. And I had to learn, Karen, what things that he did triggered me, mm-hmm. back into thinking of, or responding to the model of parenting that I was raised with. So I'm really the one that had to change the most. And
I think a lot of people don't realize that part is that you can't change someone else, and you have to change how you react or how you parent.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. I was thinking about something special about my story with Blake. And it kind of plays into what I just talked about, that I was the one that needed to change the most. The spare the rod and spoil the child was not going to work with him.
Mm.
And it's been my experience that, these kids have been hurt enough. I could, for lack of a better way to describe it, I could have spanked Blake until the cows came home, and it would not have made a difference in his behavior. And it would have only made it, well, it would have made a difference. It would have only made it worse.
Right.
It would not have improved him at all. And I had to learn, growing up in a spare the rod, spoil the child family, I had to learn the difference in consequences versus punishment, because I grew up with a punishment model and not learn from consequences. In fact, one of my heroes when I was a public school teacher was Jim Fay. And Jim Fay's love and logic and learning, that let them learn from the consequences of their own behavior. And being a public school teacher, I'd seen kids come skipping down the hall to call their mom and tell them that for the 16th week in a row, they had forgotten their lunch money. And the helicopter mom would swoop down to that school and bring it to them. And guess what? There was a 17th week that they forgot it and everything else. So letting him suffer the consequences of his own behavior, learning at a young age that I don't get to go on field trips if I don't take my permission slip home and let mom sign it.
Yeah.
I have, and kids are very resourceful. I've seen kids not take a lunch many times, and before the lunch period was over, they had taken lunch, either stolen it sometimes, or bribed another kid, or threatened another kid into giving up their lunch.
Yeah.
But when I think about the difference in what is a consequence and what is punishment, a consequence is really the result of, or a direct effect of, some kind of action. And the goal of a consequence is to teach a lesson that leads to positive choices. And I wanted Blake to make positive choices. An example of that, and I'm kind of going to roll over into something that I thought, wow, this just happened really, was when he was, before his mother got clean and sober and really stepped back into and took a more active role in his life. I let him, and she appeared to be doing well, I let him go and spend the night one night. And he had a cell phone that he could call me on at that time. And first my daughter calls, and she says, Mom, Blake won't get in the car with me. And I'm thinking, well, that's kind of strange. He usually wanted to go everywhere she did. But at the same time I'm talking to her, he's calling me. So I just hang up on my daughter and I take Blake's call. And Blake says to me, and he's probably 11 or 12 at this time, and he says, Mom, she's drinking, and I'm afraid to get in the car with her. And Karen, I can't tell you how much that meant to me that he could call, and I praised him for making that decision. And I said, I was putting my shoes on and picking up my purse to get out the door to go get him. But I got to him, and I can't tell you how much high-fived and good job, and wow, I mean, look how strong you are. And that took a lot of courage not to get in the car with your mom drinking.
Yeah.
And for me, that was a turning point with him. That's one of the times when I thought, wow, this is growth for him, because she was the absent parent. And so he wanted to be everywhere she was. And I wasn't sure that, I needed to be able to keep him safe. And there hadn't been evidence to me for quite some time that she was still drinking, but it was such a relief to me to know that he could think through what to do in that situation.
Yeah, the logic and reasoning definitely showed through in that case.
No kidding.
Oh, that's great.
So my accomplishment was he was thinking about the consequences versus, my mom's never going to know that I'm doing this. If nothing else good happened in a while, I could run on that for a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And the courage to stand up to a birth parent. A lot of our kids are scared to do that. So I like to ask parents kind of what their craziest thing is, because our kids do some crazy stuff. So you have this great story about the holy water.
Yeah. Well, when I was thinking about how to respond to that, I started laughing, and I remembered when Blake first came to live with me full time.
And how old was he at this time?
Well, he was almost 2. I mean, between 20 and 24 months. So he was talking and walking and that kind of thing, and big enough to sleep in a big boy bed. And so he was afraid to stay in his bed. And every night it seemed like a battle to get him into bed and keep him there, and so that I could go to sleep, just across the hall. It dawned on me, okay, Sharon, so you can't do, my parents used to say, get in that bed, and it was with a stern, angry voice, and I was too afraid not to. So I would do it. I would comply. But Blake, extremely strong-willed, as we know our rad kids are. So I decided that I was going to do something fun. So I had a friend at work that was Catholic, and I asked her, I said, can I borrow some holy water? And we were Baptist. We don't do holy water in the Baptist church that I'm aware of. But I borrowed some holy water, and I put it in a spray bottle. And that night, when it was time for him to go to bed, and I always did transition time for him about bedtime too, I grabbed that bottle of holy water. I put on this little plastic vest that Blake had that I could barely get on. I put this little plastic helmet that he had that kind of looked like a knight from, back in the, and a sword. And I went upstairs and I said, okay, where are these monsters? And first thing he did was laugh when he saw me. And of course, I'm already laughing. And so he would point to the closet, and I would open up the closet doors, and I would, with that sword, do battle, and I would spray the holy water everywhere, and then they were under the bed. And by the time it was all said and done, I had conquered every monster that he could come up with. I was soaking wet from sweating with all that stuff on, and he was on his bed rolling. And when I took all that stuff off, and then I gave him the bottle of holy water. And I showed him how to spray, all around his bed and put a hedge of protection around him, that he was safe, and that I was going to make sure he was safe. And he went to bed that night with the spray bottle tucked in next to him, but he went to sleep. Now, because of my great acting ability, and I looked totally ridiculous, I'm sure, had to do it a few more nights.
Right.
But it didn't take very long before we had a decent bedtime routine. And, then I could stop being all dramatic and just make sure he had I replenished the holy water with tap water, but never told him, of course.
Oh, yeah.
But it worked, and we had fun. And I realized afterwards that he would hug me a little more readily, especially at bedtime. And it was a time of bonding, being silly and ridiculous, and treating his fears as real, and making sure that we destroyed all those monsters. But I will always, that when I think about that today, that's to me one of the most precious times we've had together.
Yeah, I just think it's the greatest story. Yeah. And then just a question I want to ask about that is, especially at bedtime, you're tired, you've spent the whole day. And I know for me, and probably for a lot of parents, you don't want to put the effort into, getting dressed up and getting holy water and fighting monsters when you're tired.
Right.
But how did it, you knew it was going to be worth it, or you realized it was after, thinking back on it, if you would have, kept trying the stern voice or, doing a more punishment type, trying to get him into bed thing, how long do you think that would have taken before you had a bedtime routine going?
Oh my gosh, probably 3 or 4 times as long as it took me to recognize that I needed to change my approach to this kid. Well, and I was just going to say, after I did all that, I thought, gosh, I wish my parents had known to do that. My parents just parented the way they were parented.
Yeah.
I think the majority of parents, especially if you adopt a child, or have numerous children, you want to do the best you can by them, and you don't want life to be harder. But I was so locked into repeating what was done to me as a parent. And it worked with my 2 adult children because, I had a bond with them. But it did not work with Blake.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure after doing something silly like that, you felt a whole lot better than if, you'd had some punishment or argument about bedtime also.
Well, I was energized because it's kind of like going to the gym. Then it would take me a while to go to sleep, but he was at least in bed, and right. I felt like I was a successful parent when I did that, and not one that was making it harder for him.
Exactly. All right. Well, it's been great talking with you, and thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. And we'll see you in the next episode.
All right. Thank you, Karen.
All right, that brings us to the end of the first part of our interview with Sharon. She will be back next week for part 2, where we're doing a Q&A session. And again, she just gives lots of great information and insight into what her journey was like, and great information for parents who are going through that journey now. So make sure you come back next Tuesday and we'll have that part of the episode up. And thank you for joining us here today. Check out the description for information on our podcast, information about the Radish Ranch, and also links to our social media. We have Facebook and Instagram, so check that out. The songs on our podcast are The Way Things Go and Come Down, both written and recorded by French Press and used with their permission. This Is My Story is brought to you by the Radish Ranch. I'm your host, Karen Poitras, and I will see you next week. Stay awesome.